Hello again, Fishalots. It's Johnnyfishalot here, and let's get straight into the action with the 4 flounder or fluke rigs that you need to know that can catch you fish anywhere. Let's get into it. First up, let's talk about the simplest one up front that can catch you tons of fish in backwater areas, shallow areas, marshes, you name it. But this is really reserved to shallow water fluking, and that's simply a jig head. This isn't really a rig, it's more like a knot. And the key to this thing is to tie on a non-slip loop knot. This way you're not catching the debris in the water, whatever's getting flushed out of the back bays and estuaries and creek mouths when you're fishing for those flounder. And I'll show you exactly how to do it right here. And before we even get into the correct knots and rigs for your fluking needs, check out my free masterclass video where I put together over 26 knots and rigs to help you catch a variety of fish in a variety of different conditions, where I walk you through step by step both how to tie the knots and the rigs and when to use each in what kind of fishing condition. I also made a free, that's right, a free PDF download where you can literally see the illustrations step by step while you follow along in the videos. So I'll leave a link in the description below. Feel free to check that out. All right, and real quick, I'm going to show you the non-slip loop knot. And this is a really easy knot to tie. We're just going to make the easiest of all knots, which is an overhand knot to start. You want to make that initial loop about the size of your pinky nail or an M&M or a dime or whatever. And then you're going to take that tag end and you're going to put it through your jig head and run it right up against your knot. Now, this is the important piece to this, is when you pass your tag end through this loop, make sure it's in the same direction as your main line. And there you go. So it'll look something like that at this point. Next, you're going to take your tag end and you're just going to fold it over 2 times. That's it. You're going to wrap it 2 times around your main line. And then again, you're going to pass it through the loop in the same direction as it came out. So just like that, you're going to grab that tag end, okay, and you're going to put it all tight. And that's it. That's your non-slip loop knot. Now, the important part of this knot is you can tell this tag end is pointing directly towards the lure right there. And that is exactly what you want. That's what makes this whole presentation weedless, so that you're not catching a bunch of debris and twigs and seaweed and you name it back in these back bay areas or marshes or wherever you find yourself fishing for shallow water fluke and flounder. All right, now a quick couple of insider tips right here. Okay, not all jig heads are made the same. They're made for very different lures and different weights. Okay, so here's an example. This is a gotcha jig head and this is a strike team jig head, and these are both 1/4 ounce jig heads. But look at the difference in the hook. So the strike team hook is much bigger than that gotcha hook. So this strike king hook is going to be able to attach much larger baits to it and give you exactly the clearance in the hook that you need, as well as the correct presentation you need. So let's take an example of this. This is a 3-inch paddle tail. And if you're in the store or you're debating what you should get, a quick tip here is just take your jig head and put it right up against the lure just like that. If you see that the hook itself is coming out about the middle of the lure, which this is, and you have a lot of clearance between the tip of the hook here and the plastic itself, the soft plastic, you're doing good, you're in business, and this is a correct fit jig head for the type of lure you're looking to fish. Now let's take a look at the same jig head. This is a 1/4 ounce jig head, only with gotcha, and that's a dramatic difference right there. Now the hook does not have that same amount of clearance, and I would not use this for flounder fishing, because when that fish does bite, there's just not enough clearance between the hook tip here and the soft plastic here to actually put the hook through the fish's face. And of course, when a fluke takes your lure, you want fluke face, and you don't really want to catch your own soft plastic. And of course, my recommendation, if you're unfamiliar with the water you're fishing in, or you plan to fish various depths and you just don't want to retie every 35 seconds, is of course a 1/4 ounce jig head. You can fish a 1/4 ounce jig head pretty shallow. You can fish it fairly deep. It just gives you a lot of versatility, especially when you're fluke or flounder fishing, because you're typically going to be aiming to catch these fish during times of a lot of water movement. Uh-oh, I think I hear the baby. So we may have to interrupt this programming to go feed a baby. But when I come back, I promise I'm going to talk more about fishing rigs. Yeah, I think she's up. Babies. And all right, we're back. So you may notice I'm wearing different clothes, and that's because I got peed on. Yes, babies are like faucets, just faucets of urine that just get all over your clothes. So change clothes, but we're still talking about some Fluke. Now next up is going to be my personal favorite rig. I always start off with this rig, and that is going to be just a bucktail Fluke rig. And it's really just a variation of a high-low rig, and I'll show you exactly how I tie it here. Now, most of these rigs that I'm going to show you, I'm going to recommend a surgeon's loop knot on the bottom because it's a weaker knot and you can break away your weight and still save your lures. However, if the bucktail is going to be your bottom weight and your bottom hook, this thing is like $11. So this is an S&S bucktail. I want a stronger knot connection, a stronger loop knot that this is going to attach to. And for that, I'm going to do a figure of 8 loop knot. And the way you tie that knot is you simply fold your line over just like that. You're going to make a second loop, turn that second loop towards yourself, right, making a figure of 8, and pass the tag end through it. Now, you got it. That's a figure of 8 loop knot. About 12 to 16 inches above the loop knot, I'm going to make a dropper loop knot. So we're just going to make our first dropper loop knot. And I get this question all the time, how big of a dropper loop knot should I make for things? The answer to that is however big your lure or teaser is that you want to pass through this loop. I'm going to use my teeth right here, secure the knot, and there you go. So now we're just going to simply pass our bucktail through our figure of 8 loop knot. There you go. So that is going to be our bottom weight and our bottom hook. And then our dropper loop knot is next. Now you could use a variety of things as your teaser. Okay, you could use just a 3/0 hook here. If I'm fishing out in the ocean, I'll use a bigger hook like a 5/0 or 6/0. If I'm fishing in the back bays, I'll use a 3/0. I really like the Tsunami glass minnow teasers. These guys right here. This is a silicone skirt. They also make Mylar skirts. It's just a great bait. That's it. So now you're ready to go. Now, one of my favorite things to put on here is actually a backwater bait poison tail. It's very popular up north. I absolutely love them. They're a little bit more expensive, but I just like the overall rig. And I've been flounder fishing quite a bit this year, and I've lost quite a bit of gear in the wreck and rocks this year, and I just can't find them anywhere. So if you know a good place that has them, or it's in stock, or you can find them, let me know, and I'll make sure to get online and pick some up. But those are a fan favorite. Those are definitely a Johnnyfishalot favorite. But these Tsunami glass minnows are in close second place here, I would say. And something else I want to mention is look at the size of this hook. This is why I really like these type of baits, because that hook gap is really large. Even when selecting your bucktails, you want a large hook, and I could fit a pretty large bait on there. And typically what I'll put on these bucktails are 6.5-inch gulp baits. This is a Nemesis. I really like the action of Nemesis, so this will often go on my bucktail here. And then on this top hook, on the teaser, I'll usually put a 5 or 6-inch gulp grub or gulp twisty tail or something like this here. And so another question that comes up all the time is, what color should I use? You know, what's the best color for fluke fishing? In all seriousness, it varies day to day. Fluke are a pretty particular fish. What I would recommend is just use contrasting colors. So here's a white bucktail. I'll use a chartreuse grub right here. Or I'll use nuclear chicken is a popular color. This is just a variation of chartreuse, right? You got bright fluorescent green mixed in with different reds, and it shows up underwater pretty good. I mentioned this on previous videos. Take a look around at the other fish-a-lots. If they're using certain weights and certain colors and they're catching fish, switch over to that. So if chartreuse is the ticket on any given day, chartreuse and white, let the fish tell you what they want. And something else I will say is a lot of guys will use stinger hooks on these bucktails or on their bottom rigs or even on chicken rigs, which I'm about to get to. I'm not a huge fan of the third hook. So that'll be like a stinger hook coming off of this. That's just so much more hardware that you're going to end up getting caught in the wreck, so I'm not a big fan of it. If you want to use a stinger hook and you catch a lot of fish off it, great, but typically speaking, I do just fine with just a single hook, and I don't hang in the wreck nearly as much as those guys that are using the stinger hooks. I was trying to film YouTube, And you beat on me. Yes, I see. Yes. Oh, okay. Well, that explains it. All right, and this honestly is a great solution to losing bucktails and the expense of losing bucktails. And all right, so here's the popcorn rig or the chicken rig. Really what you want to use is, again, this is a 5/0 hook right here. I like to use bulb squids. These are pretty cheap. You can get them on Amazon or anywhere. You get packs of 4 of these things for just a few bucks. And this is really just a great alternative to the bucktail rig that I showed you, because if you're losing a lot of rigs, this just won't break the bank. And I'll show you exactly how to tie it. It may not surprise you, but it's a combination of all the loop knots and things that we've already discussed. So let's get into it. Now, in the bucktail rig, as you recall, I recommended doing a figure-of-8 loop knot because it's so much stronger and you don't want to lose the bucktail. But in this case, I'm going to recommend using a surgeon's loop knot, which is just, you're going to loop over your line and you're going to wrap it through twice, just like that. And that's it. That's your surgeon's loop knot. And that is a weaker knot, which is totally advantageous when you're fishing with these weights, so you can break off the weight and keep the rest of your lure. So now the question I get pretty often is, where in relation to the weight should I make my first dropper loop knot? And really the answer to that is it depends on the structure and it depends on that day's strike zone. These fish are going to change their opinions of things all day, every day, and no trip is the same. So you kind of have to figure it out every time you go out. Now, if you want to be right on the bottom, because that's where the strike zone is, I recommend about 5 inches above that dropper loop knot, and so that'll keep that hook right on bottom. If you get away with a higher strike zone, I recommend 12 inches for that first initial dropper loop knot, because that gives you a lot more buffer to not get hung in the wreck and still catch a lot of fish. So here's our first dropper loop knot. There you go. All right, another 12 or so inches. I would say about 12 inches above that, maybe 8, depending on, again, the strike zone and how far away the hooks are from the bottom. Here's another surgeon loop knot. Tighten those down with my teeth, so that's going to go out of the picture. And again, if you're interested, I have that free webinar that I'll link down below. Make sure to click on that, where I go into even bigger detail on how to tie these rigs and how to tie these knots. So there you go. That's it. That is the rig. So first we're going to put on our weight here, right? And that's going to be the bottom of the rig on the surgeon's loop knot. And on that first dropper loop knot right here, we're going to first put our bulb squid on. Now you have a couple different options here, what people like to do, okay? Here's the bulb squid I'm going to slide on. Now what you can do is, here's the loop right here. Now what you can do is you can either put a bead in there, and that'll prevent this from sliding over the hook, or you could put a piece of Mylar or hair skirt in there, and that will prevent the squid from moving down over the hook. Either way you wish to do it is perfectly fine. When it comes to colors, I just like to contrast them. So you see this is green and the squid itself is white. So that'll work just fine. Or if you don't want to do that, you could always just use a bead, which is right here. So you stick that bead in and there you go. And that's it. Now that's all that's left is to put the hook on. And there you go. So there's your bulb squid on your 5/0 hook. Super easy. I just used a bead so that the squid doesn't move over the hook. And now the hook is free to put on a piece of gulp or a piece of bait or whatever you like. And you are ready to go. You just second that up on the second dropper loop knot. Again, you could use Mylar or anything you want to position those baits. So here's something to pay attention to though. Again, I mentioned in previous videos to pay attention to what the fish are doing. So if you're getting a lot of strikes on your teaser hooks, or if you're foul hooking fish with your bucktail, that means that the fish went and hit the teaser and got the bucktail instead. That means that the strike zone is higher in the water column than right on bottom. So if you take a look at this rig, typically people will tie their first dropper loop knot about 5 inches from your surgeon's loop knot, and that ensures that that bait is right on the bottom. Take a look at that. That hook is right on the desk, which means you're dragging it on bottom perfectly. And you're always going to be jigging at some sort of angle, right? You're never going to be jigging perfectly straight up and down because you're dealing with current and different things like that. So now, that could be great depending on where you're fishing. If the strike zone is right on the bottom, by all means, tie that dropper loop knot 5 inches above the surgeon's loop knot and drag that hook. However, if the strike zone is higher in the water column and you get away with tying your first dropper loop knot higher, take a look. About 16 inches, maybe 12 inches above on an angle, that still puts your hook about a foot off the bottom. That is well within the strike zone of a fluke, and you give yourself a foot of clearance between that first hook on your dropper loop knot and the wreck or the rocks or whatever kind of sticky structure you're fishing in. And that could be ideal, and that could be the difference between retying your rigs all day and catching fish all day. As you know, if you pull your lure out of the water to retie, that's less time you have in the water and less fish you're going to catch. So just keep that in mind. Wherever you want to tie your dropper loop knots, it just depends on where the strike zone is and the application of fishing that you're using, as well as the structure you're fishing in. So now the final rig to show you is just a long leader rig. The main purpose of this rig is to get some distance between your rig itself and your main line so that the current is taking care of the motion of the rig and the bait and triggering those bites. And the first step, of course, is just to snell your hook. So I like to use the knotless knot. This is my favorite way to snell a hook. It's just so easy. You just wrap the line around the base of the hook 7 or 8 times. I've never had this knot fail. You take your tag end right here and you're going to shove it through the eye of the hook towards the point of the hook. Make sure, that's important, make sure you're shoving it towards the eye of the hook. This way you get a little bit of a hair rig going on there. My carp fishalots will know what I'm talking about. And then you cinch that down just like that and you're all snelled up, ready to go. That's your snell on a 5/0 hook. Now you can literally add whatever you want to this rig. This is super simple. Again, you could add your tube squid if you want. You could add your skirts if you like. You could add a bunch of stuff to make this as attractive or not as attractive as you want. Here's a version right here. You know, this is a little bit fancy. It's got the spinner right here. It's separated with a couple of tubes of plastic, some beads, of course, a hair skirt, and then your hook. So you don't even have to get anything this fancy with this type of rig. All you really need is the hook, your piece of bait, and I would recommend a 3-way swivel. So your weight goes here, your main line gets attached here, and it prevents tangling up. Now, a couple of mistakes with this rig is a lot of people will tie this on and throw it out in the surf. I've seen people use this in the surf where there's not a whole lot of current. Really, you just get Tangle City, as you can tell right here. This will wrap around your main line. You'll come up with a ball of mess. This really has to be used in high current conditions. Also, I see the mistake when people drop this heavy weight down, what will happen is the weight will go straight down and the rig here will go straight up, right? It's just gravity, essentially. And as the weight is falling down to depth, this is wrapping around your main line here, just causing an absolute mess. So by the time you do get down to the bottom, you just have a ball of line and rigging that's not going to catch you anything. So just be mindful of that. You really have to fish this where the current and water movement is going to push this away from your main line. And when you're dropping it, you have to drop it slow enough where that current is going to catch and you're not going to throw your bait up over your main line and tangle it all up. And for more tips on how to catch these fish, go ahead and click on this end card right here where you can see all these tactics in action. And of course, I'll put a list of everything we use on these videos in the description below, so feel free to check them out. Thanks for joining. I'll see you out there on the water, Fishalots.